Hey, what's up, church family, and welcome to our first December issue of the Friday 20, where we talk for what will be about 20 minutes we're going to do a devotional this month. We're going to be, last month we focused on kind of talking through some theological issues. We had Pastor Rick with us, and we decided as we kind of upgraded our production quality each week, we were going to upgrade our production quality again by subbing out Rick for Pastor Mark. So we've made an improvement there, certainly, at least, especially in the height category. But we're going to be doing a devotional, and we're going to start with 1 Corinthians 13, and we're going to kind of talk through a little bit of that as we get into kind of preparation for the holiday season, and we start thinking about Christmas and Advent and just the significance of the love of God being poured out onto us and sending his son. We want to talk a little bit about love and kind of what Scripture says about that. But before we get into it, as it's now December and Christmas is drawing near, and Mark has already insisted that Sunday morning services have some Christmas music in them, tell us a little bit, Mark, what is your favorite thing about Christmas?
Well, first of all, with the title, I knew you just had a birthday, and I thought it was about celebrating your 20th. I wasn't sure there, but that's kind of what I was thinking. But
not quite that young.
But I think the greatest thing about Christmas is just remembering the reason for the season. And I'm not, obviously have great memories as a child of just waking up to the celebration of Christmas. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of the reason at that time. The reason at that time when I was young was because there were great toys and I loved them. Yeah. But now just really seeing the magic of Christmas, it even changes people that don't know Christ. Yeah. And it's just it's just a neat time.
It's definitely, those holiday seasons, is as much as they can be for some people, it's easy to forget that they can be very painful times. That the holidays can be very difficult for some. It's always a time where there's a little bit of contemplation, and perspectives and thoughts and attitudes tend to shift a little bit. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of really cool things that happen around the Christmas season. So with that, one of the things that, a lot of times we talk about in the church, the love of God, we go to the cross, we go to the tomb, which makes total sense. But sometimes what we kind of forget is not just that Jesus died for us, but that Jesus was willing to come here at all, that he was willing. And that's, I think, that there's a huge aspect of the declaration of the love of God in Jesus saying, I'm going to leave heaven, I'm going to leave the throne room, I'm going to leave the comforts and all this stuff, all the things that I'm entitled to, all the things that I deserve and should have. I'm going to leave all of that and become like you and deal with all of the garbage that you guys have. And to me, sometimes it's easy to overlook that when we're talking about it,
Yeah. And I think not just to overlook it, but I don't really think that we can yet fathom that kind of love.
Right.
I think that love is so strange and unique to us and so unbelievable that until we are totally transformed, I'm not sure we can ever truly, and until we see heaven, that we truly understand what Jesus gave up.
Yeah, that's a really good point with it, just in thinking the love isn't just in this, the sacrifice that Jesus made for us isn't just his death, but understanding what he left behind. Yeah. And if we could appreciate the significance of that alone would be more than enough just to break down all of our objections and obstacles to him.
Absolutely.
So with that, in the spirit of talking about love, let's look at kind of what Paul, the chapter of the love chapter of the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul talks about the way of love. And he describes to us a bit of a biblical picture of what love is like. And so 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 4, says, "Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." So ultimately, what you have kind of in this text is sort of a comparison. There's things that love is, and there's things that love is not. There's the positive things, this is what love does, this is how love behaves, and then there's the things that love cannot, will not do. And so you get the positive that you do and the negative that you don't. And love is expressed, right, in both ways. So let's start by looking at the love is. And so the two dominant characteristics that Paul describes with love is love is patient and love is kind. So Love is patient. What does that mean? And how do we understand that?
Yeah, and I think first too for me is making sure that we believe and understand this is a biblical, godly definition of love, not the world's definition of love, right? I mean, people love chocolate ice cream. That's a totally different thing than what we're talking about today. But I think for me, I read where patient, it says that we can accept or tolerate delays, problems, or suffering without becoming annoyed or anxious. And when I think about that, I think the greatest thing that other than the transformation of my heart through Christ was being married and having children and understanding what that meant, that we had to be able to understand that sometimes children don't know better, and so they're doing things that may, that would eventually, would annoy us. But I think just that patience of saying, hey, you're more important than I am. That's just a love that we're still trying to be about.
No, that's good. So, that being able to, and the parenting analogy works really well with really kind of any component of love, and especially the component of patience when you have a child, and that. But there's also this component too of kind of how we respond to frustration or how we respond to injury, because in any relationship there's going to be conflict. Mm-hmm. There's going to be, whether it's parent, kid, spouses, friendships, family. We intentionally or not wound each other at times. And part of patience is not resenting the faults of others. It's not reacting to injuries and responding to like, oh, you injured me, so now I'm going to injure you. It's kind of eye for an eye kind of a stuff of like, well, you said this horrible thing to me, so I'm going to say this horrible thing to you. It's bearing with that. It's patience is kind of a patient endurance of, you've wronged me. But in patience, with love, is that I don't need to wrong you back just because you did that. I can take that and I can demonstrate something else. It's not eye for an eye. It's not, I'm going to give what I get. And as sometimes people treat that like it's, you're a pushover. You're just, if somebody dishes it out, you just roll over with it. But at the same, that takes a certain amount of strength to not, snap back with whatever they gave you and go, okay, you did this. And I think that's it's a hard thing for us, because in that moment, especially when, if somebody says something to me and it's wrong and unfair and cruel, it's hard to not let myself convince myself that my just response is to defend myself or to put them down.
Sure.
Especially when you're looking at something in their life and you go, I could take that blow at you.
Right. I think you're right. I think, so many times that we have that ability sitting there going, this is really easy to take, right? Yeah. And we deny it as we become more Christ-like. I think about too is just, Christ had the ability to come off of that cross at any second, right? He could have come off, and if I would have been Christ, you guys would be not saved, and those guys would be dead. Right. So I think about that as as Christ, he showed that patience, didn't he?
Yeah, and that bearing with, that tolerating injury, that not giving back what you were given, but rather responding in love by being patient with those. Literally, it's not holding on to that anger. It's not keeping that to yourself when you've been wronged. And I kind of, a lot of that, I think one of the things that's really cool with this is you can take this passage and you can basically just draw all these threads to basically every other scripture. And you can look at like God's patience with us. Yeah. Right? You look at the Judges. You see this cyclical pattern. Israel is stupid and does evil in the eyes of the Lord. They go into suffering. They cry out. God delivers them. They do evil. And it just keeps going around. And yet, no matter how many times they go around this, and God knows that's the pattern. He knows what they're going to do. But when they cry out to him, he still comes to them. He still rescues them. And he has that heart, that patience with us. And you think about like with us and how he is with us, like how many times we fail and we mess things up, and God continues to be patient. It's truly an incredible thing. And when we adopt a position of patience, not only are we declaring love, but we're behaving the way that Jesus behaved. Mm-hmm. And we're showing people that love is not just, I'm going to treat you well, provided that I'm happy with you, and provided that, because sometimes we do that too, right? We think, I've got to be authentic. Sure. And in the name of authenticity, we go, if I'm mad at you, I'm going to be a jerk to you. Well, that's just a lack of control. Mm-hmm. But with patience is, I'm going to treat you well, even if you don't treat me well in return. And that's a really powerful thing to do. It doesn't mean that you have to like let people take advantage of you all the time, but it does mean we set a standard. We dictate how we're going to treat others, even if that's not reciprocated.
Yeah. I think the world says, do unto others as they do unto you. And our goal is to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a difference there.
Yeah, shifting from the silver rule to the golden rule.
Yeah.
So then the second aspect, do you have anything else you want to say about patience?
No, move forward.
Okay. Huh? Move forward, okay.
I'm trying to act like I wasn't being
Yeah,
patient.
I'm so tired
sorry.
of talking about patience.
I'm
Let's
sorry.
move on. See, I told you it was an upgrade from Rick. All right, so the second aspect of what love is, and these are defining characteristics, and it's important to kind of note, of all the things that God says, he's got all these different traits, all these different characteristics in the Bible. The trait that he tells us is his defining characteristic, is love. So he chooses to be defined by his love. As his followers, as children, we ought to be known for our love. And so understanding what love is and how to live it out is such a huge important part, especially during the holiday season. We have opportunities to mend fences with, and that's what I've been thinking about that with, with the families that have, there's some conflict and some brokenness that exists there. There's been loss. There's been just things that have been handled poorly in the past. Families are messy a lot of times. Well, this is a great season to demonstrate, to remind ourselves of the love that Jesus gave to us, and then to be patient and forgiving towards our family members who've maybe wronged us, and start that healing and reconciliation process, which kind of leads over towards kindness, right? When you think of kindness, what the scripture is saying about kindness here, how would you describe that or define that?
I think it would be more, regardless of whether I think you're right or wrong, I'm going to respect your opinion. I'm going to listen, I'm going to hear it, and then I'm going to try to see your side of it. There's a kindness there that says, I believe that you have the right to share your opinion as well, and I'm interested in it. So there's a kindness there that I think becomes Christ-like.
So you'd almost kind of put it as kindness similar to respect and valuing someone.
Very, very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good. I like that. So one of the things about the word that's used here, the actual root of the verb for kind, is actually useful. And so the nature of kind of the imagery that he's painting is that love is useful. It desires to and finds ways to do good for its beloved. And so it's an action word of having a benefit, of showing undeserved generosity. And I think that can connect very well with respect and value of going, hey, your opinion doesn't really deserve respect, but I'm going to respect you anyhow and treat you well with that. But kindness is one of those components that really breaks that cycle of anger.
Yeah.
It's what lets us let go of the tensions and the struggles and just the messiness of things, because again, we get caught up in you hurt me, I hurt you, I'm mad at you, you're mad at me, and we just keep trading it off, and it's a circle that you can never get out of until something breaks that loop. Kindness is one of the most effective ways to break that loop.
I remember, when you were little, they would always tell you, smother them with kindness, right? And when someone's throwing something at you, you're just continuously, coming back with kind words, and you're continuously not showing anger. And, I think eventually people want to know why. And that's your chance to point them to Christ.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a good, something that you think of as a really good example of either patience or kindness in the demonstration of love?
I think for me, probably Stephen in the Bible.
Okay.
Because if you think about, what Stephen did at his death, he loved Christ so much he became Christ-like.
So not a speech, but the the after.
Yes. Because
you stiff-necked
right
people with
before he
uncircumcised.
dies, he loved them enough to tell them the truth, and then he loved them enough to say, I forgive you. God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And so I think that is as much kindness as I've seen in the Bible, as far as a great example of someone going, they're about to kill me. Would you forgive them? I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. So,
all right, any other thoughts on kindness?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, I want to break this down a little bit more than we started off with, and to note that there's essentially 4 quadrants of what Paul is describing here. So you have love is, and then there's stuff that love is not.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have love does and stuff that love does not. So let's transition from the is to the is not. So we've seen the positive side of here's the characteristics, the defining attributes of love. The good parts are patient and kind. Mm-hmm. And the parts that love is not, the negative things that love will not do in its character, in its nature, in the very essence of its existence, there are 4 of these, right? Love is not arrogant or proud. Love is not rude. It is not irritable, and it is not resentful. All right, and so your biggest one of those, pride, right?
Yeah.
The arrogant problem.
Yes.
And that's so you're kind of contrary characteristic to being patient is being arrogant, being proud. What does that look like?
You know, I think when we look at all of these, but especially arrogance and pride, I think what we have to understand is those are the things that come natural to our sinful heart, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're not careful, those things come out because they're natural. They're not supernatural. Supernatural is not doing these things. And so I think that with that, I think that's what I have to remember is I have to remember that, you know, there's a book called 3 Seconds. And before you respond, count to 3. And I think so many times in my life, I come across arrogantly when I speak too soon, when I haven't had time to digest what they've said, and that's the old sinful nature of Mark.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good. That's because what you're looking at is arrogance, pride. Biblically, it's a high view of oneself. It's an overinflated view of oneself, where it's thinking too much of oneself, mm-hmm. whether high or low. It's still too much thought towards oneself, because a societal positioning of like insignificance can still actually be arrogance in its kind of almost pity approach. And so there is a component to that of but a lot of it what it comes down to, and I think it's in doing a lot of marriage counseling and things like that, one of the things that you see a lot that's most destructive in any relationship is the simple question, what about me? Mm. That attitude, that thought is pride and arrogance getting into our heart. It's selfishness getting into our heart. It's the most destructive thing to what love is, in my opinion, because that's what it's a betrayal of the very essence of what love is. Because if your focus is on loving yourself, then you're not really going to focus very well on loving the other person unless they make you feel that love on their own. So you love them when they love you, but not when they don't. Yeah,
what does Jesus say? Even a bad person doesn't give, their child a snake to eat or to eat, whatever, right? So it's the same thing. I think the love of God is outward, and the love of the world is inward.
No, absolutely, and that's so you got your high view of self, biblical humility, not thinking of yourself at all. Well, love doesn't think about itself. Love doesn't focus on itself. Love is focused on the one that it gets to love. Mm-hmm. So one of the points that you kind of started off with is, we talk about love like loving ice cream and loving. What's interesting is we have one word for love, and we cover the gamut with the whole gamut. Yeah. I was like, I always get that in gambit, and then I'm like, it's not gambit, but then is it gambit? It is.
I like it.
Yeah. But we cover everything with love, and it's this big, broad spectrum word that we just kind of slap over everything, and layering it is so complicated. The Greeks had 4. Mm-hmm. You get your basic storge, that's your love of the family. Then you have your eros, your erotic love, that's the passionate love that you have. Then you have phileo, which is where we get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. But one of the definitions of phileo that I think is really interesting, and the common sense of it is the love of that which is lovable. Mm. And that is the very nature of kind of that worldly love, is when you make me feel good, when I appreciate you, when things are good, and I have those warm and fuzzies, then I'm going to love you. Mm-hmm. But it's all reactive, it's all responsive, it's dependent on the other person. Yes. Whereas the characteristics that Paul is describing are not dependent on the other person. It's dependent on what God has poured into us and the nature of love itself, which is to flow out. And so that takes arrogance out. We can't be love, true love, the love that Paul's describing can't be arrogant because it can't be about itself.
Mm-hmm. And I think, when you look at an agape type love, that's how marriages last, right? Because I love you not because you love me back. I love you with no strings, right? I love you with no strings. But with phileo, it's I love you as long as you love me back. And so you see those two different kinds of love going on in our world today, and you understand why why our divorce rate is the way it is, right?
Right. Yeah, because the feeling wears off, and you're like,
yeah, yeah.
All right, so rude. That's next.
Yeah. Again,
Love ain't rude.
Again, I think it's very same thing. I think it's just it's so when we are arrogant, we are rude, right? And so the two kind of always coexist with all of these. But I think that's the biggest thing there is that a rudeness is simply not caring about anyone else's rights, not even caring, not in our society we're taught to win. And so we win at all costs, even if we're rude. If I can win, I can smother them. That's what I do, right? And that's a worldly kind of love that causes that rudeness.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the components of love is that of rudeness is that it's jokes at other person's expense. There's a crudeness, and irritability, but it's I'm going to say things or do things at your expense that make me look good, and that's part of kind of the imagery behind that rudeness in that. But for the sake of time, because we're not going to go on for too long here, for irritable and resentful, being quick-tempered, lashing out at people, things like that, holding on to bitterness and frustration, things that kind of all go against kindness. What love is defies what love is not. And so it cannot be bitter and resentful. It cannot hold on to wrongs and anger and things like that. It lets it go. So those are the components of kind of what love is and what love is not. It's a really exciting thing. But ultimately, really, the most important thing to understand about love is